Howdy folks, and welcome back to the Dieselbird channel. Today we're going to be covering one of the most asked questions online about the TT250, the Hawk 250, and all the other bikes with the CG250 motor, and that is how to do a valve adjustment. One of the things that most people seem to have an issue with is finding the correct top dead center, and we will be showing you how to do that in HD quality today. Now first we're going to show you all the tools you'll be needing for this job. Here we have a 3/8 drive ratchet and a 14mm deep socket, your spark plug removal tools, or an 18mm socket will also work. I have a 1/4 inch drive and a 1/4 inch socket, a big flat head bit, a big Phillips bit, a pair of pliers for adjusting the valve adjusters themselves, and a piece of rubber to put over the adjusters so you don't damage them with the pliers, a 10mm wrench to remove the valve covers and to loosen the adjuster bolts, and a feeler gauge that measures in 0.04mm to 0.88mm. The measurements I will be using for my bike are 0.5mm and 0.8mm. Okay, so the first thing you're going to want to do is remove the 3 Phillips screws that hold this side cover on here, and it'll give you access to the crankshaft bolt. A lot of guys try and use the Kickstarter to spin the bike over to get it to top dead center, and I've gotten it close with the Kickstarter before, but it's not easy, and you're going to have a lot easier time by just using your 14mm socket. And the first thing you're going to want to do is take the 1/4 inch and the Phillips bit. I prefer to do this way so you have a less chance of stripping out the bolts. Just apply a nice firm pressure, pop each one loose. Next, you're going to take the 1/4 inch and your flat bit. The reason I do it this way is because it's very soft aluminum, and as you guys can see, I've already stripped this one out and had to cut a new notch into it. It's better to do it this way so you don't strip it out like I did. But if you do, just take a Dremel or some sort of saw blade. These things are really soft. Just cut another notch into it just big enough for your flathead bit. These don't need to be super tight either. Just barely snug on there. Just enough to keep it from leaking. Next we will remove our spark plug. This can be done with the spark plug removal tool that comes with the bike, or an 18mm socket. Next thing you're going to want to do is remove this hose right here. Now we're just going to go ahead and loosen the valve cover bolts, but not remove them just yet. Okay, now with everything removed, you'll take your 14mm socket to the crankshaft of the bike, and you're going to turn it counterclockwise. Very slowly turn it counterclockwise. You'll feel it spin around as you go, and it'll get tighter and then looser. Now the mark that we're looking for is the T. There's the first double line. There you can see the F for fire. And right there, it almost perfectly falls into place, the T for top dead center. Here you can see what the valves are doing as the engine is being rotated. Now, as I said before, you do not need to remove the fuel tank or the fairings in the front in order to remove the valve cover. Just make sure you take this hose loose and push it up out of the way. And then you will just very carefully take that out and set it somewhere where it won't get dirt in it. Now, an important note I forgot to mention earlier in the video before we go ahead and adjust these valves is you want to do this with a cold engine, a completely stone cold motor, as in sitting overnight for at least 12 hours after running. So I have already ridden my bike for today because I had places to go. So for the purposes of this video, we will not be actually loosening the nuts or adjusting anything, but I'm going to walk you through the entire process here. So what you would do is just start by taking your 10mm wrench and loosening this adjuster lock nut up here. And then we're going to come back to the pliers that we grabbed and the piece of rubber. Just take this piece of rubber, set it up on top of your adjuster there, and then you just stick the pliers on top and use that to actually loosen the adjuster. 9 times out of 10, every time I've tried to do this, those adjusters are just a little bit too tight to get with your fingers. So you just stick the piece of rubber on there to keep from damaging the adjuster and just give it a little loosen. And then the next thing that you would do, we're going to take our feeler gauge set here. Since we are working on the intake side right now, we're going to take our 0.05mm feeler gauge, and with the adjuster and the lock nut loose, you'd simply insert it in between the adjuster and the valve itself. And what you're going to want to do is slide it in there with it a little bit loose, and then take your finger and hand tighten the adjuster just to the point where you feel slight resistance. If you try to pull on the feeler gauge, you should still be able to pull it out, but you should feel a slight dragging on it as you're trying to remove it. And then you would just go ahead and repeat the same process for the other side. For the exhaust valve, you just take your 0.08mm feeler gauge and that is basically all there is to adjusting the valves. The only other thing is make sure you leave the feeler gauge in as you're tightening the nut, and I usually leave the adjuster just a little loose on the feeler gauge, so that way when you actually tighten the nut, it does tighten the adjuster with it a little bit. And that is all that there is to adjusting the valves on your TT250 or Hawk 250. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time.